organization known as the Arctic Council, which is composed of the countries around the Arctic Circle, and it is basically an organization which is working for the creating of a what you can call you know a kind of a collaboration of all the countries in the Arctic area for the dealing of the challenges faced by the Arctics. Okay, so take a look at this Arctic Council. What is it? The leading intergovernmental forum promoting cooperation in the Arctic. Right. So it's a coming together of the countries of around the Arctic areas for the creation of joint activities in Arctic in terms of arresting climate change and the related ideas of how it works. If you go to the website of the Arctic Council, take a look at this. And I want you to pay attention to this and possibly also take notes of this because the Arctic Council has been in news recently. I'm not speaking out of just general curiosity about the Arctic Council. Arctic Council has been in news in the end of 2023. So this is something that can become a little bit of a relevant understanding for us in any case. I'll show you another news for Arctic Council. Take a look at this. Look at the question. Why is the Arctic Council important to India? Now there was an entire coverage in the Hindu newspaper which basically tells why is the Arctic Council important from the perspective of the Indians. The Arctic Council is a high-level intergovernmental forum that addresses issues faced by governments in the region and the indigenous people of the Arctic. It was formally established in 1996. So this is the kind of information that we have to take a look at with regard to understanding the Arctic Council. Like, and also this thing, India is currently an observer member of the Arctic Council. Recently, the government unveiled India's Arctic policy document. Okay, so this is again a part of your current affair. So with regard to India's participation in the Arctic Council as an observer member and the fact that India has given a policy, what is known as India's Arctic policy, makes it important from the perspective of current updates. So I hope you're taking an attention to this particular part specifically when we talk about India's Arctic policy document and India's participation in the Arctic region. Okay. Okay, and so take a look at this. Arctic Council is the leading intergovernmental forum promoting cooperation, coordination, and interaction among the Arctic states, Arctic indigenous peoples, and other Arctic inhabitants on common Arctic issues, in particular on issues of sustainable development and environmental protection in the Arctic. It was formally established in 1996. All Arctic Council decisions and statements require consensus of the 8 Arctic states. Okay, so take a look at this. The creation of the Arctic Council, as it is known, came with what is known as the Ottawa Declaration. Ottawa Declaration defines these states as members of the Arctic Council. The 8 states have territories within the Arctic and thus carry the role of stewards of the region. The national jurisdiction and the international law govern the lands surrounding the Arctic Ocean and its waters. The northern regions of the Arctic states are home to more than 4 million people whose health and well-being is on the top of the Arctic Council's agenda. Right? So these are 8 member states who have been created by the Ottawa Declaration and defines the obligations of these states to work in a joint cooperation to create a position by which the Arctic Ocean region can be kept in a form of protection which does not impact the life of these areas, as people of these areas are going to be directly at the receiving end of any kind of a fallout in the Arctic region with regard to climate change or natural disasters. Just take a look at this introduction once. Okay, so what are the states which are members of Arctic as Council? As you can see, India is the observer state of the Arctic Council. Canada, of course, Ottawa is in Canada, capital of Canada. So you have the Canadian as the, what you can say, members of Arctic. Then you have Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, United States of America. Okay, take a look at this. So you see how these countries which have a clear access to the region, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden. You see, so these five countries are coming together to create what is known as Scandinavia because of the proximity that Scandinavia has with the Arctics. The five countries in Arctic Council are the Scandinavian countries. The other countries are, of course, Canada, Russia, and the United States of America. And you can see why the Arctic Council must be in the news recently, because the presence of what you can call the presence of Russia in the Arctic Council is almost at a level of loss because the other members of the Arctic Council are heavily inclined towards America. And because of the Russia Ukraine war, as Russia is facing isolation on most parts, in most amount of activities, Russia is facing isolation. Exactly on the same grounds, we are seeing that the countries which are led by the USA in the Arctic Council, the Scandinavian countries, all of these are NATO members also, they are isolating the Russians from the Arctic Council, and that is why the Arctic Council is a feature that we're taking a look at, is in news for the current times. Okay, right? So you get a sense of some data about the Arctic Council. You have the understanding of the Ottawa Declaration, the permanent members of the Arctic Council, and these are what you can call the permanent bodies within the Arctic Council. But these are not going to be relevant for us. We are going to be focusing upon the objectives of the Arctic Council. Take a look at this. First, take a look at this. How and when was the Arctic Council established? Right? Just read this part once, please. The question is, how and when was the Arctic Council established? The Arctic Council was established in 1996 when the governments of Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Federation, Sweden, USA signed the Ottawa Declaration. The establishment of the Arctic Council was preceded by the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy, a declaration on the protection of the Arctic environment. Okay, this is basically what the you know initial composition structure of the Arctic Council appears like. Then the second question is, what does the Arctic Council do? Now, take a look at this. The Council's Strategic Plan 2021 to 2030 guides its works towards the Arctic as a region of peace, stability, and constructive cooperation that is vibrant, prosperous, sustainable, and secure home for all its inhabitants, including indigenous peoples, and where their rights and well-being are respected. Right. So the idea is, of course, to make sure that the Arctic Circle area is kept in a manner in which it is protected from the impacts of climate change, and also the local indigenous populations of that area who are going to be at the receiving end of the first problems created by climate change, they are also kept in some kind of a stability. That's basically the whole idea. So it conducts research, it conducts a kind of a joint cooperation, and these activities of the Arctic Council are basically what are given on the website if you want to take a look at it in detail. But I think this should be sufficient for your prelims examination. Yeah, I think this should be sufficient. Okay, now to get a sense of this part, this is why the Arctic Council was in the news recently. Take a look at this. This is why it was in news recently. The isolation which was experienced by the Russians during the Arctic Council. Take a look at this. The research that was jointly being cooperated between the Western and the Russian researchers, that has come to almost a cut off completely as a part of boycotting Russia from all parts. This has been a recent current update which has made the Arctic Council somewhat important from the perspective of current updates, right? And also we are taking a look at this part, which is this is the part that we're going to take a look at slightly. India hopes to create a permanent presence in the Arctic. India's Arctic policy document was unveiled recently. This is a part of 2022, which is still in orbit of the current updates. So we'll take a look at this news article once, please. Just take a look at this part. India aspires to have a permanent presence. Just see over here, from here to here. India aspires to have a permanent presence, comma, more research stations and establish satellite ground stations in the Arctic region, suggests a perusal of its Arctic policy document that was officially unveiled in 2022. India presently has a single station, Himadri. Okay, now take a look at this. The station that India has in Arctic is known as Himadri, which is basically based in Norway, where research personnel are usually present for 180 days. India is in the process of procuring an icebreaker research vessel that can navigate the region. Through its existing network of satellites, India aspires to capture more detailed images to assist in the development of the Arctic region. The Arctic has 8 states. Take a look at the name of the states that comprise the Arctic Council. It is home to about a 4 million, a tenth of them being indigenous tribes. India has had a research base in the region since 2008 and has also had 2 observatories. Arctic weather influences the Indian monsoon and hence has been of interest to Indian researchers for decades. Climate change and the melting of ice caps imply changes to the Arctic weather. India has so far spent 13 expeditions to the Arctic since 2007 and runs 23 active science projects. About 25 institutes and universities are currently involved in Arctic research in India, and close to 100 peer-reviewed papers have been published on Arctic issues since 2007, the Ministry of Science and Technology said in a statement. It has a status of observer member in the Arctic Council. 12 other countries have such a status in the Arctic Council and participates in several meetings that are mostly themed around research. Beyond science, India also expects business opportunities in the Arctic. Take a look at this last statement given by the Government of India, known as the Arctic Policy for India. You see, questions like these are very subtle questions. You may not find them bouncing off too much in the newspapers, but the UPSC is very fond of these underdogs which come here and there and fit the pattern of the examination very clearly. So that is why we are trying to focus slightly upon understanding the whole concept of the Arctic Council over here, right? So India aspires to have a permanent presence, more research stations and establish satellite ground stations in the Arctic region. India has a single station in the Arctic, and currently India is the observer state within the Arctic Council. Right, that is what we have to understand. So twice this part has appeared in the current updates last year, and because of its frequency and appearance, we are going to mark the Arctic Council as an important international organization.